Before the first star ignited, there was only the primordial sound, a silent vibration waiting to be heard. True cosmic power lies not in the act of speaking, but in the absolute receptive void of listening.
Right. It is the blank canvas upon which the entire universe is painted.
Yeah.
Because without that void, without that profound capacity to receive, there is only noise.
And stepping away from that unrelenting noise of the outside world is exactly what we are doing today. We are settling into the timeless, quiet sanctuary of Café Karma.
It feels incredibly peaceful in here.
It really does. The air in this room is heavy and comforting. It carries this distinct, earthy scent of steeped herbal tea. If you look closely through the muted light, you can see dust motes dancing slowly, just settling over the cracked letter spines of the ancient astrology books lining the walls around us. There is only the sharp, solitary clinking of a porcelain cup against a saucer. And then absolute contemplative silence.
It's exactly the right atmosphere for what we are about to do.
I completely agree. And within this profound stillness, we want to outline our mission for you on this deep dive. We have gathered a stack of esoteric source texts to explore a very specific heavenly blueprint. Our focus today is exclusively on the 22nd nakshatra of the lunar zodiac, a constellation known as Shravana.
Yes, Shravana.
But we need to be really clear here. We are not looking at the mundane, everyday world just yet. We are isolating the pure cosmic essence of this constellation. We're examining its archetypal architecture exactly as it exists in the heavens, far above human complexity.
It is a necessary separation, I think. To truly understand the blueprint of Shravana, we must first look at it in a vacuum, completely untainted by earthly interpretation or human flaws.
Right.
What we are doing today is mapping the divine anatomy of receptivity itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we are mapping an anatomy, we really have to start with the foundational identity built into its very name. According to the text we've gathered, the name Shravana is derived from the ancient Sanskrit root charu.
Correct, and that root translates directly to hear or listening. But it is important to understand that this isn't passive hearing.
Oh, it's not.
No, not at all. It represents the active acquisition of knowledge. It is the deliberate act of turning one's awareness toward a source of truth.
Which makes perfect sense for a constellation built around receptivity. But as I was reading through these ancient sources, I immediately hit a massive paradox.
The limp.
Exactly. The texts explicitly state that the name Shravana also translates to the one who limps, or the lame one. And when you look at the primary symbols assigned to this nakshatra, we are presented with three very distinct images. First, the ear.
Right.
Second, 3 footprints in an uneven row.
Yeah.
And third, the trident. I mean, I'm struggling to see how these fit together. How does the ear, which seems to represent pure receptivity, connect with symbols of physical limitation, like uneven footprints, or a symbol of assertive martial authority, like the trident?
It is a beautiful contradiction. But to decipher that paradox, we have to analyze the ear psychologically. We have to view it not as a biological organ, but as a highly sophisticated cosmic vessel.
Okay.
In this esoteric context, hearing is not about the physical detection of acoustic waves in the air.
What is it detecting then?
It represents clairaudience. It is the capacity to capture the subtle, etheric frequencies of the higher realms. Consider the ancient Guru Shishya Parampara.
The oral tradition.
Exactly. It is the sacred, unbroken chain where supreme wisdom was passed directly from the mouth of the teacher into the ear of the student.
Wow.
In that tradition, the written word was considered secondary or even vulnerable to misinterpretation. The true essence of knowledge had to be heard. The ear, therefore, is the ultimate, unblemished vessel for truth.
I see. So the ear is the container itself. But what about the limp? Why introduce a physical defect into this divine anatomy?
Well, because a vessel must be held steady, and the journey to acquire supreme knowledge is rarely a sprint.
That's very true.
The uneven footprints, the limp, they signify that the pursuit of this etheric truth is not a swift, effortless run. It requires a deliberate, sometimes agonizingly slow pacing. When you limp, you are hyper-aware of every single step you take. You cannot rush. You must be present.
That reframes it completely for me. The limp isn't a weakness, it's force mindfulness.
Precisely. And that brings us to the trident. The trident represents the ultimate spiritual authority. But notice, it is not an authority taken by force.
Right, it's earned.
Yes, it is the authority that is naturally bestowed upon the one who has patiently limped along the path, who has carefully listened, and who has finally acquired that universal truth.
That structural perspective is vital. Because if the ear is the cosmic vessel for truth, and the limp is the pacing required to carry it, then we need to look at the mechanical structure holding that vessel firmly in place within the universe.
The planetary architecture.
Exactly. Because an energy this sensitive surely needs a framework. This brings us to the precise astrological and planetary blueprint of Shravana.
And this is where the architecture becomes incredibly complex.
It really does. So the texts detail that this constellation resides entirely within the sign of Capricorn, or Makara Rashi, and Capricorn is ruled by the planet Saturn.
Right. And Saturn is the planet of rigid structure, restriction, weight, and time. It is cold, heavy, and deeply pragmatic.
But, and this is the wild part, the planetary ruler of the nakshatra Shravana itself is the moon, known as Candra.
Yes. The moon is the exact opposite of Saturn.
Completely.
The moon is fluid, hypersensitive, empathetic, and constantly fluctuating. It inherently wants to absorb everything it encounters.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think of this complex Moon-Saturn dynamic like a highly sensitive satellite dish mounted on a heavy concrete bracket.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, the moon is the dish itself. It's perfectly contoured, hyper-receptive, scanning the skies, picking up every subtle frequency and microscopic transmission floating through the universe.
That is an incredibly precise visualization. And Saturn, in this scenario, is the concrete.
Exactly. Saturn is the rigid, unyielding, concrete mounting bracket bolted deep into the bedrock. Because think about what happens if you separate them. If you don't have that heavy concrete bracket holding it down, the sensitive dish simply blows away the second a high wind comes through.
Right, it's ungrounded.
It's too light, it's too vulnerable. But on the flip side, without the dish, the bracket is just a useless, heavy block of cement sitting in the dirt, serving no purpose at all.
Which perfectly illustrates the profound internal friction designed into this constellation. You have the fluid, empathetic awareness of the moon locked into the strict, demanding, and structural environment of Saturn.
Yeah, it sounds intense.
It feels like a contradiction, it feels uncomfortable, but we must understand that this is a completely necessary tension.
Why is it so necessary, though? Why not just let the moon float freely?
Because we have to look at the other components of its blueprint. The texts tell us that Shravana possesses a deva, or divine temperament.
Okay.
Furthermore, its fundamental nature is kara, which translates to movable, light, and swift.
So it's a divine, incredibly fast-moving energy.
Yes. But here is the anchor, it's purushartha. The primary life goal driving the energy of Shravana is artha.
Artha being material prosperity, wealth, or purposeful action in the real world.
Exactly. So how do you take a divine, swift, and highly sensitive lunar energy and turn it into tangible material prosperity?
I need a lot of discipline.
You require extreme restraint. If Shravana only possessed the moon's vast sensitivity, the cosmic intelligence it receives from the universe would simply drift away as scattered, ungrounded thoughts. It would be a beautiful daydream that produces nothing.
He would just be a satellite dish tumbling through the wind.
Precisely. The Saturnian framework provides the absolute gravity required to preserve that wisdom. It forces the sensitive lunar energy to structure what it hears into an enduring, prosperous reality that serves a tangible purpose. Saturn builds the library to house the sacred texts that the moon has gathered.
That is profound. A blueprint this specific, balancing such delicate lunar sensitivity with such immense Saturnian gravity, requires a master architect. You don't get this kind of precise, functional tension by accident. And we find that architect when we explore the divine mythology governing Shravana.
The deities presiding over this space are fascinatingly paired. We have Lord Vishnu, the supreme preserver of the cosmos.
Right.
And alongside him is Goddess Saraswati, the goddess of learning, wisdom, and sacred speech, often referred to as the flowing one.
And the central myth tied to this nakshatra, the story that the ancient sources point to over and over again, is the epic narrative of the Vamana Avatar.
Let's break down that narrative, because it holds the key to the entire psychological framework of Shravana. In this myth, Lord Vishnu incarnates on Earth not as a mighty warrior, but as a dwarf Brahmin.
He literally embodies the limping one, or the one who is lame, connecting right back to the root of the name.
Yes. In this small, unassuming, and physically restricted form, he approaches the incredibly powerful King Bali, who has conquered the three worlds.
A very intimidating figure.
Very. And the dwarf asks the king for what seems like a humble, almost pathetic gift. Just 3 paces of land, just enough space to sit and meditate.
And I do have to point out the dark irony here regarding King Bali. Bali looks at this dwarf and thinks he is making this incredibly magnanimous, charitable gesture. He thinks he's giving away a tiny, insignificant patch of dirt to a limping beggar, only to fall victim to the ultimate cosmic real estate fine print.
Because the moment the king formally grants the request, the illusion of limitation shatters. Vishnu suddenly expands from the limping dwarf into the gargantuan Trivikrama form.
Trivikrama meaning the one of three strides.
Yes. He grows to a cosmic scale. With his first massive stride, he measures the entire Earth. With his second stride, he encompasses the atmosphere.
Wow.
And with his third and final step, having nowhere else to place his foot, he places it directly on King Bali's head, pushing him down into the netherworld, but simultaneously granting him ultimate spiritual liberation.
It's an incredible visual. But if we strip away the mythological imagery, what does this actually mean for you, the listener? How does this archetype function in reality?
What's fascinating here is the psychological depth hidden beneath the surface of that narrative. The archetype of the limping dwarf represents a fundamental truth about how the energy of Shravana operates within a consciousness.
How so?
It signifies that the journey of this energy almost always begins from a place of perceived limitation, restriction, or smallness.
Ah, this is the Saturn influence again, right? Feeling compressed, feeling heavy.
Exactly. The individual, or the energy itself, may feel deeply constrained, inadequate, or overlooked initially, just like a dwarf asking for a tiny patch of dirt. But that smallness is a disguise.
A disguise for what?
Through the act of pure listening, through the dedicated pursuit of learning, guided by Goddess Saraswati's mastery of sacred speech, a massive internal transformation occurs.
The knowledge acts as the catalyst for expansion.
Yes. By gathering truth through the ear, the native achieves Trivikrama. They cross boundaries that once seemed entirely insurmountable. They expand their consciousness, their understanding, and their influence across all three worlds, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual.
That is beautiful.
The limp, you see, is not a permanent defect. It is the deliberate, necessary pacing required to eventually measure the universe.
It makes me think about how often we mistake quiet observation for weakness. The person in the room who isn't speaking, who is just listening, is often perceived as the smallest presence, the Vamana. But in reality, they are the one gathering the data required to expand and encompass the entire situation.
That is a perfect earthly translation of the heavenly principle. The silence is the preparation for the stride.
So if Vishnu's three strides represent this massive expansion of consciousness across the universe, what is the actual cosmic mechanism that binds these three worlds together? Because you can't just have an expanding energy, right? Something has to hold the resulting structure intact.
It needs a binding force, yes.
And our texts point to a specific mechanism, a specific power or Shakti assigned to Shravana. Can we explore that?
We must. The specific power governing this nakshatra is called Samhana Shakti.
Samhana Shakti.
Yes. The source material translates this quite literally as the power of connection. The ancient texts break it down into a specific formula.
Okay. What is the formula?
They state that its basis above is seeking, its basis below is the paths, and the ultimate result of this cosmic equation is the connection of all things together.
So what does this all mean for you? If we want to visualize Samhana Shakti, think of it like a massive telecommunications switchboard or a master networking router in a highly complex server room.
I really like this comparison. Let's trace the signal.
All right, the seeking, the basis above, is the incoming invisible data signal arriving from the heavens. It's the pure Wi-Fi transmission of universal truth.
Okay.
The paths, the basis below, are the thousands of physical Ethernet cables waiting on the earth below. These are the earthly avenues of action, the different lives, the different material realities.
And Shravana is the router itself.
Exactly. Shravana takes that invisible cosmic signal, the seeking. It decodes it. It then identifies the precise earthly cables required, and it hardwires them together so that the entire vast cosmic system communicates perfectly. It ensures the divine data reaches the mundane hardware.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the true genius of the preserver, Vishnu, reflected in this nakshatra. Shravana is not an energy that attempts to create something entirely new out of absolute nothingness.
It's not a creator energy.
No, that is not its cosmological role. Its purpose is to sustain existing truth.
I see.
It takes the fragmented truths, the disparate people, the isolated facts, and the silent frequencies scattered across the universe, and it connects them. It weaves them into a unified divine order. It is the architectural force that ensures nothing of value is lost, binding the cosmos together through profound structural intelligence.
I have to push back gently on that interpretation, though. And maybe this is just the modern mind struggling with the concept of receptivity.
Sure, go ahead.
But if Shravana is simply receiving signals from above and routing them to paths below, doesn't that make its energy purely passive? Is it really just a cosmic router sitting in a dark server room, passively waiting for a signal to arrive before it actually does anything?
I'm so glad you brought that up because that is a very common misconception, but it is a critical one to dispel. In the framework of Shravana, active intentional listening is the highest form of action.
It doesn't look like action from the outside, though.
It might not look like physical labor, but it is not passive at all. The act of turning one's awareness outward, of silencing the internal ego, of maintaining absolute internal silence to detect the subtle frequencies of the universe, that requires immense spiritual stamina. Think of the tension we discussed earlier between the moon and Saturn. Holding that focus is exhausting work.
It takes effort to keep the satellite dish calibrated perfectly to the sky while the wind is howling.
Exactly. It is the necessary prerequisite to any universal progress. You simply cannot connect the paths below if you do not first exert the profound, agonizing effort required to hear the seeking from above.
That makes total sense.
Listening in this pure archetypal state is a dynamic, sustaining force. It is the very gravity that holds the transmission together. Without the listener, the sound literally does not matter.
The void of listening creates the space for the truth to exist.
Precisely.
So let us take a moment to look at the pristine heavenly blueprint we have decoded today. We began with the pure, silent receptivity of the ear, a cosmic vessel designed to capture the subtle frequencies of ultimate truth.
We did.
We explored the vital, necessary tension between the hypersensitive fluid moon and the rigid, unyielding structure of Saturn, the delicate dish bolted to the concrete bracket.
We traced the boundary-crossing strides of the Vamana Avatar, proving that what begins as a perceived limitation, the limp, is actually the deliberate pacing required for universal expansion.
And finally, we uncovered Samhana Shakti, the profound, active power to act as the cosmic router, connecting all things into a unified, communicating whole.
We have successfully mapped this pristine archetypal architecture in the heavens. We understand the cosmic design in its purest form. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over.
Please do.
We have just spent our time describing a mind that acts as a hypersensitive cosmic tuning fork, an instrument designed for perfect divine silence. What happens when this pristine instrument is dropped down into the chaotic, noisy, and deeply flawed reality of earthly human life?
The server room isn't quiet anymore.
No, it is deafening. How does a mind designed to hear the subtle whispers of the universe survive the unrelenting roar of the modern world? How does the satellite dish function when it is bombarded by static, by social media, by anxiety, by the pure noise of modern survival?
I invite you to hold on to that question. Let it sit quietly in your mind. Let it be the subtle frequency you tune into, because that exact thought will guide our future exploration of Shravana's earthly manifestation. For now, the dust motes continue their slow dance in the fading light. The air remains heavy with the scent of steeped tea, and we return to the quiet, contemplative silence of Café Karma.